Welcome, everyone. Okay. Um, yeah, thanks for tuning in on your Tuesday evening. I'm sure it's blazing wherever you are. Um, Go ahead and put in the chat if you are comfortable. Name, pronouns, where you're coming in from, an organization if you want to shout them out. Whatever you'd like to do tonight is going to be very casual, very intimate. There's no, we're breaking the fourth wall, so just get cozy, get your beverage of choice. Yeah, and we're gonna get started.
Excellent. Welcome everyone. As Sarah Murray said, it's a hot one. My name is Allison Henry. I'm with LA Forward. I'm the San Gabriel Valley lead organizer. It is my great pleasure and honor actually to have you all here on the 9th of July, very warm evening, with SGV Casita. I'm joined by Godfrey Plata, the Deputy Director of LA Forward. We're very excited to have you here for this discussion, this presentation by SGV Casita. I'll just give a quick introduction as to how SGV Casita and LA Forward came to be connected. LA Forward, we've hosted a Housing Justice Academy. We're in our second year of it. It's a free uh, program option for people 6 months, 6 Saturdays of the year. And you join us to discuss housing policy, organizing, um, everything actually, housing element, data, SCAG data, etc. And the first year of this cohort, the lovely people in SGV Casita met us, met each other, and this project was born. This is a real testament to advocacy, to people really caring about their community, and to, I'll just say it, forward-thinking femmes. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Sarah Murray to provide additional introductions, but it's with great pride and a great honor that SGV Casita is presenting tonight Extreme Heat and Housing 101. With that, Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Allison. And thank you, Godfrey, for running tech behind the scenes. Um, all right, so if you want to go ahead and hit the next slide, please, Allison. We're actually going to start with a land acknowledgement because housing starts with land. So we're a San Gabriel Valley organization, and the San Gabriel Valley hosts over 30 cities and several unincorporated areas, neighborhoods. It's currently home to over 2 million Angelinos, so that's a fifth of Los Angeles, and is the ancestral home of the Tongva Gabrielino Nation. They are the first Angelinos. Thank you, Allison. Next slide. Okay, so what are we talking about tonight? We're going to talk a little bit about who we are as an organization, kind of the work that we're doing in the San Gabriel Valley. And then we're going to talk about the problem, which is extreme heat and how that affects housing. So we're going to spend about half the presentation sort of giving a lot of background context. And then we're going to talk about some of the tools that you're going to need to have conversations in your housing work. So that's the core principles. We're going to go through some heavily used terminology in the field so that you can sort of know what you're seeing when you're reading news articles or talking with your city council, either way. And then we're going to have time for Q&A. If you can press the next button, Allison, there's a pot. Yeah. Okay. So we are also going to be having a poll that's going on. So I want to just preface. Oh, actually, let me rewind for a second. I want to preface too that tonight is really mostly about the problem and not heavily focused on the solution. We are going to have a 102 later on this year, so keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll mention a couple heat interventions here and there during the presentation, but it's just not very focused on solutions. If you do have questions about solutions, or if you have questions at any point, you can still ask those. Like I mentioned earlier, tonight is very casual, very intimate. Please feel free to pop any questions you might have in the chat if you're not comfortable coming off mute, and don't worry about interrupting us because that's what Allison's here for. She will interrupt us for you. So, okay. So for the folks, oh, wait, go back one more. Sorry, one more. Thank you. Okay. So for the folks following at home, we're going to be dropping a lot of links in the chat as we go so that you can read more if you like. I used to teach. I love to give you all the tools more than you want. So just, get ready for that. And among the many hats we wear, Amanda and I are also academics. So I want to let you know that the poll that we're going to be launching tonight is going to be asking you about extreme heat and housing. So, on just 4 slides of the presentation, we're going to launch those poll questions. There's 3 to 7 questions at a time, 20 questions total. The goal of these is actually twofold. So, first, when you see the questions, you'll see kind of the data we're looking to collect. That data is going to help us, SGV Casita, advocate for tenants when we're working with residents and city staff or other local organizations. Second, as I'll talk more about in the next slide, I'm pursuing my PhD right now at Antioch University, and this poll is part of my research. So the polls are completely anonymous. You don't have to answer any question. You can also answer one question, but not another. It's totally up to you. We don't anticipate any of the questions being triggering, but you know you best. So just take care of yourself as we go. And that includes if you need to get up, go get water. Yeah, it's hot out today. So before I have Godfrey launch the polls, does anyone have any questions about any of this? No. Okay. If you do end up having questions later, please feel free to reach out to me or the Antioch IRB chair. Her name is Lisa Krieger. So as I mentioned, there's 4 batches. We're gonna launch the first one right now. Godfrey, can you launch bucket number 1, please? We'll give you a couple minutes, or maybe 1 minute or 2 to go ahead and answer these. Okay, maybe about 10 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Okay. Yeah, interesting stuff. Thank you all for participating. We have a few more left. I'm like scrolling through the results. Can y'all see the results? Going to assume that's a yes.
Yes, we can.
Thanks all. Okay. Yeah, this is super interesting. Thank you for participating. I don't necessarily have any like amazing insights looking at these right now, but we're gonna keep at it. There's more where that came from, and we're gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so we're gonna talk briefly about us. Um, this is us. This is SGV Casita. We are a team of 3 people. So the story of how we met, as Allison mentioned earlier, begins with LA Forward's Housing Leadership Academy, which like super shout out to that. It was such an amazing free resource for San Gabriel Valley. It was San Gabriel Valley specific, and LA City gets a lot of resources, but this side of town does not. So the three of us, we met, we formed a group. Kiana, who works with tenants on the daily, brought to our attention how afraid many tenants were to install window units. So we decided to kind of look into that. But we're going to get into that in a little bit later. I'm going to start with like who I am. So I am Sarah. I'm a fourth generation Angelino. I'm from Covina. I've been working in nonprofit space for 12 years, specifically in LGBTQ healthcare and nonprofit management. And before that, I used to teach creative writing. In fact, both my undergrad and my master's are in creative writing, which I got into because of my fervor for underrepresented voices. And right now, I'm pursuing my PhD in systemic change. For SGV Casita, I do a lot of the communications, the partnerships, and the program management stuff. Amanda?
Hello, everybody. My name is Amanda. Unlike Sarah and Kiana, I'm not originally from San Gabriel Valley, but I am from a very hot valley. That valley is Phoenix, Arizona, and that's where I grew up before ending up in LA County. I'm a civil engineer, and I've spent the majority of my career working with utilities, and I'm pursuing a master's degree in urban planning beginning this fall. And my role in SGV Casita is I tackle a lot of the technical and STEM related research.
Yeah, Amanda saves our butt when we don't know what science is doing. That's Amanda. So thanks, Amanda. Kiana is our third partner. She wanted to be here tonight, but she wasn't able to make it, and she sends her apologies. But she's also from Baldwin Park, so San Gabriel Valley. She's a paralegal and tenant advocate, so that's the expertise that she brings to the team. And she also is just really involved with the community here, like on the ground. She does a lot of mutual aid work. She is the one who's collected a lot of our tenant interviews. And as I had sort of alluded to, she's sort of how we got started. Other fun facts about us include that two of us are millennials, two of us are women of color, two of us are living with medical shit, and we have one queerdo, and we're all fire signs. So, next slide. All right. So that's us again. You get another photo. So we dove into this because of Kiana's work with tenants. As you sort of heard, the three of us have wildly different backgrounds, different areas of expertise. And so not only are we well balanced, but we're sort of a powerhouse. We have yet to encounter something that at least one person on the team can't speak to. But we started with interviewing tenants. We started collecting stories. So speaking of, if you have any stories that you want to share with us about extreme heat being a tenant, please reach out to us. We are still collecting stories. But uh, on top of collecting stories and talking with people like personally, we also did a really deep dive into heat policies, housing policies, lots of heavy academic research. We're going to simplify a lot of that for you tonight, so you do not have to be putting on any sort of extra effort this evening that you don't have to. But these investigations really revealed why AC, like the question about AC, is really a question about extreme heat and who has access to cooling and who does not have access to cooling. So that's why our mission is now heat equity for every neighbor. And tonight we're going to give you that bird's eye view of the conversation, how to have that conversation in your own neighborhoods, your own communities, so that you can better, reflect on how extreme heat impacts your work, because I guarantee it does. Right now we are in our Charmeleon era, if that means anything to you. So next slide, please.
Okay. I'm going to have Allison or Godfrey actually fire that second bucket of polls. All right. And going to give you a couple minutes to engage with these. Excellent. Thank you.
Ooh. Y'all are getting the hang of the polls.
This has been an exciting adventure learning how to do polls in Zoom for all of
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we take our polls very seriously.
Okay, I'm going to give like 10 more seconds. Okay, ending the poll. And here are the results if you're interested. So it looks like we have
Yeah.
plenty of people with some health vulnerabilities. Got some medication stored in the refrigerator. Very good.
Do what you got to do, man. Yeah.
Okay. So before we start talking about the heat itself, let's talk about humans and what happens to us when we experience heat. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, you'll see a couple of the body's responses to heat. Um, like we have sweating, we have dehydration. Notice that that affects the kidneys and the livers. There's dizziness, headaches, confusion. We have some heart issues, pulse. If you check out these medications, if you're on any one of these, the heat can be a more serious threat. Should also mention that the heat can affect the medications themselves, whether it's the effectiveness of them as well as the shelf life. We got some lung issues at the end. And Allison, if you'll click one more time.
Oh no, go back. And then
That's okay.
oh,
We have some animations, but they're kind of finicky. So basically, the question that I want us to consider is who do you think these heat waves affect the most? Would love if you would throw that in the chat. Who are some people that or some medical conditions that we think would be affected the most by the heat? I see the elderly, yes.
mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Kids, yes, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to
Yeah,
the
housing
next slide.
insecurity. So,
Also,
oh,
Sarah, if you'll drop in the chat, the LA County Climate Vulnerability Assessment. So, LA County actually did a study to try and answer this exact question, and we'll put that in the chat for you to peruse at your own pace.
yeah, all of these answers in the chat are extra correct. Basically, people working outdoors, people with thyroid conditions,
Is
people with
asthma in there? As an asthmatic, the heat and the poor air
yeah,
quality are terrible.
people living with lung conditions, people living with depression. If you take allergy meds, right, or blood pressure meds, um, yeah, we're gonna talk through. Amanda's gonna talk through like why are those people affected. That's what these lovely numbers are. Go ahead and take it back, Amanda.
So, as we have established, folks with health disparities are the first people to feel the effects of heat on a really hot day, but eventually we all do. The most cardiovascularly fit person that you know eventually succumbs to the heat, and they may do it even more suddenly than anyone else because their body might fight off the symptoms of heat exhaustion. Of course, I'm not a medical professional, but I did read visual aid this book about dying in
Oh,
the heat. And so this is what it said. When you get too hot, your weird little body pushes blood to the skin, and so that that blood can be cooled by sweating. And if your sweat evaporates, then your body's able to cool off a little bit. But if that little cooling trick doesn't work, your core temperature starts to rise, and that's when trouble starts. So hyperthermia is abnormally high body temperature, and here on the slide are some of its milestones. So in the beginning, you're feeling faint. Heat stroke occurs. That itself is often fatal. Seizures happen, and then when your internal temp gets to 107, the cell walls just start melting. So that's terrifying. Wanted to underline for any mutual aid friends that the National Weather Service starts administering cautionary heat warnings when the heat index is between 80 and 90 degrees. And if you click one more time, there should be an animation that is a cultural Easter egg contained in that slide. Yep, there we go. So if that means anything to anyone, take that up with Sarah because that is her handiwork, not mine. With that, I'll throw it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Amanda. Allison, one more time, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to get into the terminology. We're going to get into the tools that you're going to need to know to start advocating for either tenants, tenant protections when it comes to heat, or just understanding some of that news that's been coming out. So here we go. Next slide, please. Okay. So the very, 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 very first thing that you need to know is that extreme heat kills more people annually than any other climate emergency combined. It kills more people than hurricanes. It kills more people than tornadoes. You name it. It is the deadliest climate emergency that we're facing. And if you have been getting those heat warnings these past few weeks from LA County, that's because finally our infrastructure is catching up just a little bit to treating it like the crisis it is. But we've still got a long way to go. It's worth noting, though, that, let's say there's a blackout that happens during a heat wave. It would only take roughly 36 hours, so a day and a half, before the National Guard would have to step in. So that's fun. And we'd be looking at deaths that would rival Hurricane Katrina. And Katrina caused almost 1,400 deaths. So this is scary stuff. There's a lot of infrastructure and policy gaps, but one of the most well-known gaps is FEMA. They've also been getting a lot of news attention lately because they're actually not authorized to respond to extreme heat. There's like 16 official crises that FEMA can respond to, and extreme heat is not on the pre-approved list. COVID-19 famously is also not on the list. So how did they get FEMA to get involved in that, right? They had to classify the pandemic as a natural catastrophe. So there are gymnastics that can be done, but it's inefficient. And the entity that controls FEMA and the pre-approved list, that's the Stafford Act. So FEMA gets its funding from and its permission to act from the Stafford Act, and that's what lawmakers are currently trying to go after. But this is a gap on a federal level, and as you can imagine, there are also state, county, city gaps. We're not going to get into all of those tonight. We just don't have the time, and there's some other things you need to know first. But FEMA gets a lot of news attention, as it should, so we wanted to sort of explain that tonight. And Amanda, if you can just drop in the chat some links for FEMA so you can just sort of read a little bit more later if you'd like to. Thanks, Amanda. Okay, next slide, Allison, please. Okay, so the next sort of sticky thing to tackle, the long story short is that tracking heat deaths is really, really inconsistent. The underlying cause might be, for example, if you have a heart condition, as we mentioned earlier, like that's going to get exacerbated by the heat and that's going to send you to the emergency room. And well, if you recover, that might get tracked as a heat related illness, or it just might get tracked as your heart condition. If you have a heart condition and that gets exacerbated by the heat and sends you to the emergency room and you don't recover and you pass a few days later, that's probably going to get tracked as death due to heart condition, not heat. So it gets tricky because number one, the relationship of time, like how long the symptoms last versus how long the heat wave lasts. Maybe heat played a role, but it was indirect. Number two, you saw how many conditions and how many medications heat affects in our earlier slide. That's tons of people. That's potentially a lot of miscounts when heat impacts all of those people. And three, we plumb don't have good tracking infrastructure in place in the first place. It might depend on how that one particular hospital, that one particular doctor identifies heat illness, but it can vary by country as well. I think we have some global folks on tonight. So if that's, that's just good for you to know that it's just really inconsistent. And these three graphs are evidence of that inconsistency here in just California. So the first one, top left is from an LA Times news article in 2021. And this news article is actually a landmark in terms of getting public attention. So, Amanda, if you can drop that in the chat, please. But to get this graph, the LA Times actually had to employ their own data analysts to estimate the numbers. Yeah, wild. So the second graph, top right, is using data from the CDC. It is also attempting to measure deaths using the red line that you see there. And some of the spikes, if we had more time, you could sort of match up the spikes, sort of parallel the LA Times one in terms of time, like in terms of when the spikes are happening, but they don't really agree to the depth, like to what degree they're happening at. And the last slide on the bottom is not even deaths at all. That's just measuring emergency department visits that were heat related, which is also probably an undercount. The yellow line you see at the top is California, and the blue line you see at the bottom is actually LA County. So one area for improvement is to get a better handle on tracking all of this, get some consistency, which is a huge involved process. But just know that if you see any heat death stats in the news, they are likely very much an undercount. Next slide, please, Allison. Okay. So here is some more terminology before we get to the housing specific stuff. This is the last slide just in terms of context. There are 3 more things you need to know before we get to the housing stuff. So the first is extreme heat. This term, technically speaking, is defined as when temperatures hit 90 degrees or more for 2 to 3 days. But there's also like people use excessive heat. They get conflated a lot. If you are subscribed to any of the LA County official email warnings, if you get those alerts, they tend to use excessive heat instead of extreme heat. We've sometimes seen excessive, like that term used to describe when temperature is above what's considered normal for the area that time of year. So extremely subjective. But this is a really immature area of study. So it's normal that there's a little bit of inconsistency happening right now. But I invite you to have feelings about these labels. Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer extreme heat? Do you prefer excessive heat? Does anyone have feelings about those? We do. I'll reveal them in a second, but I'm just checking. Crickets. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you that we at SGV Casita prefer extreme. We're partial to extreme heat because it gives it that extra apocalyptic kick. It's a little bit more elevated. So that's the term that we use. Next one, heat risk. So what is a person's heat risk? We've somewhat discussed this already. We went through how heat affects the body, right? We looked at the different medical conditions. Well, we invite you to think about who is more susceptible to those medical conditions, which communities live by freeways, for example, and are more likely to develop lung conditions, which communities have less access to green space, right? It really isn't difficult to draw a connection between extreme heat and systemic racism, or disadvantaged communities, and yes, tenants. Tenants are their own risk demographic. By being a tenant, you are more susceptible to all sorts of health conditions and additional stressors. Yeah. Amanda is going to drop a study in the chat for you about renters and air conditioning if you want to read more about that later. Yeah. And then the last one, heat index. So has anyone heard this one before? Has anyone heard heat index, that term before? Does anyone want to give a shot what that one's about? Yeah. This one's probably more widely used here. This is another one where there's a lot of inconsistency. So cities and organizations measure things differently. There's the heat index, which is the feels like temperature. So it combines air temperature and relative humidity. There's also the wet bulb temperature. Europe uses the excess heat factor. There's the heat wave magnitude index. You see where I'm going with this. It's like there's a lot of different measuring sticks. Everyone's got a different measuring stick. So although these frameworks provide a starting point, it's a little frustrating. They're not universally standardized. They're really just meant for communication purposes. They're cobbled together to warn people. They're not really meant for scientific purposes. It's tricky because different temperatures are dangerous at different places, depending on resources and different times of the year. But one promising warning system that we really like actually is one that just launched in 2022 in Seville, Spain. They're the first place in the world to start naming their heat waves as we might name a hurricane. So that's a really like novel approach to this. It's we took a look at the study and it seems like it worked. It seems like it was effective. We're interested to see how they sort of progress. They've only had a couple go arounds of this, and Amanda's going to drop that in the chat as well, please. And thanks, Amanda. Also, the sun's going down around us, so like if our lighting starts changing and getting weird, it's because we're trying to figure this out. Sorry for the production value. But I'm gonna just pause here for any questions before we move on to the housing stuff. How's everyone doing? Is everyone hydrating?
Pardon the pun, but it's a bit of a fire hose of just getting all the information. So we're taking it all in.
Yeah. We've got a lot. So this is the like light version. Amanda and I had a meeting with Allison a few months ago to talk about this, and oh man, Allison was like, "Whoa, hold your horses." Thanks, Amanda, or thanks, Allison, for that. If you have any questions, y'all, I know that this is sort of dense. Please feel free to interrupt us as we go.
I'll just give a shout out to everyone on the call, right? For taking that fire hose in. Maybe we'll provide you some cooling relief. But also, right, we're all here for the kind of the same reason, like motivated by something beyond ourselves. So yeah, Sarah and Amanda, grim yet informative. So encouraged.
Thanks all for trekking with us. Okay. We all right to move on? Just checking. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna now we're gonna get into the housing stuff. Okay. So this is another dense slide. I'm sorry. Okay. We're gonna we've been talking a lot about the context, right, for extreme heat. So we're gonna start now talking about how this is going to apply to your work if you're doing housing justice work or if you are someone experiencing housing precarity. So we're going to start with evictions and rent evictions. So as we mentioned, this particular issue was how we got started as an organization. We had a lot of tenants, or Kiana was talking with a lot of tenants who were afraid to get window units and wondering if their landlord could evict them just because they had a window unit installed. And the answer is yes. Yes, you can get evicted. We don't have a lot of anecdotal evidence of people actually getting evicted specifically because of installing a window unit. We have a lot of evidence of fear and anecdotal evidence of rent evictions. So rent evictions, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, it's when a landlord wants to renovate the place, does a lot of renovations at once, and uses that as an excuse to evict you. So definitely not fun. But the moral of the story is when we investigated, yes, you technically can get evicted for putting in a window unit. So that's just something to know. Next issue is the split incentive problem. So what does that mean? Landlords don't typically pay utilities, right? The tenants usually pay their own utilities. So there's a disconnect. Why should a landlord increase utility efficiency? Why should they improve the efficiency of an air conditioner when they're not the one paying the utilities, right? So that's what a split incentive means. It describes when the distribution of a financial obligation and the rewards are not being split equally. That's a mismatch. So the third problem is maximum air temperature. What is that? So if you look at our handy dandy little graph on the side, there is something called a minimum air temperature. So in the winter, right, when it gets freezing, you have a right to warming. You have a right to have your abode be able to hit 70 degrees at least so that you don't freeze. That means your landlord has to provide you with, like, the unit has to be able to hold in heat legally. It has to be able to hit 70 degrees somehow, usually with a heater. So that's legally already a rule that exists under Title 25. But there is no rule, there is no policy. There's a policy gap for maximum temperature. So your unit can get 120 degrees in summer, and that's legally allowed, right? That's not good. So people are aware of this. LA County is also aware of this. The Board of Supervisors has had a bunch of meetings. Those dates you see there, not super important, just so that you know that meetings have been happening, some motions have been happening to try and get a maximum temperature in place. And what they actually want is one temperature to rule them all. They said, no funny business. We don't want one temperature for this type of unit and another temperature for that type of unit. We actually just want one temperature. Go figure out what that temperature should be. And they gave this responsibility to the Department of Public Health. And the Department of Public Health had to go get contractors and say, contractors, we need to have listening sessions with the community so that we can just like figure out what the tenants want, what the landlords want, what do people need, what does that max temperature need to be, right? So there's this whole effort going on right now. The next listening session, actually the first listening session, is in a couple weeks on the 25th. We will be there. All of the lovely poll questions that you've been answering, we are taking that data to the listening sessions. The listening sessions are supposedly for landlords only this time around, but we will be there. So thank you for your help. I'm going to pause because I know this specifically are just 3 really big gaps. Does anyone have any questions about these? Okay. I'm gonna pass it on to Amanda to talk about energy. Buckle in, y'all.
Yeah, get scared. Okay, next slide. And Godfrey, will you fire that poll bucket 3, please? All right, everybody, take a couple minutes. There's 6 questions, so one might take a little longer, but let's get to it.
Sorry, I don't have some like cool background music for you guys. Some like jazzy elevator music for this.
I thought about talking about my own air conditioning habits, but didn't want it to be distracting. Okay, we're about halfway done. Let's do another 30 seconds or so.
You're doing great, all.
Yeah,
We're cheering for you.
Thank you for your time and
for your service.
polling during. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close this. I'll share the results in case you guys are interested.
Ah. All right.
And then I'm gonna hop back in because I talk a lot and feel like you guys should get started. So, okay. We're going to talk about energy now. Our first, kind of the way I think approaching what energy has in common with air conditioning is these 2 like 2 questions that are on the slide. Is there enough energy for cooling? And is there enough money to pay for that energy? And so I'm going to tell you guys a story. So when SGV Casita was first getting organized, we read an article about a report that had just been presented to LA City Council at one of the, at one of their meetings. And what the report was, it was from LADWP, so the LA Power Department, and they were asking 2 questions and presenting those questions to the city council. So the first question they were asking is, all right, if we do mandate a maximum acceptable temperature in a dwelling, what is that going to do to our power grid? Is that going to be a catastrophe? And then their second question was, all right, when it comes to affordability, let's take a look at our discount programs and see if those are being successfully deployed. And what they said, I'm going to go into more detail because I get obsessed with this type of thing. Okay.
She does, y'all. Sorry.
I'll try and hold back. Sarah will let me know if I'm getting too crazy. So for the first part of this question, is there enough energy? This is what they ended up doing. They looked at the hottest day, the busiest electrical load of the entire year, which of course happens to be the hottest day of the summer. And they said, okay, this is how much energy LA City used on this day. This was the peak load at the hottest hour of the year. And then they did a calculation to try and see how much bigger would that load be if the people who needed AC, who aren't able to get to this, maximum temperature without AC, if they were using the crappiest air conditioning that they could find off the street, what would be the additional load? And so they took their the data from the actual hottest day, hottest hour, and then they compare this to the number with the excess calculation of the crappy AC. And when they compared those two, there was a 2 to 3% difference, which I feel like we're prompted to be like, oh, only 2 to 3% more, but 2 to 3% of the hottest day, biggest load is a giant number. What they didn't say was whether this was concerning or not. They weren't like, oh, no problem. Everything looks great. And they also weren't like, this is going to be terrible. So not entirely clear if they made any decisions about the grid capacity after that, but that is what they found. And then their second question, which was, is there enough money to pay for the energy? They talked about their discount program. Their discount program is called Cool LA, and it's available to qualifying customers. And what they said about that is that it wasn't not working well at all because it was barely used. And so then it became a question of, do not enough people if there's a car alarm going off, can you guys hear that?
Nope.
Okay, excellent. Only me. Why aren't people using this? Is this because it's too many hoops to jump through? Is this because people don't know about it? So that was a concern. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to continue throwing a lot of my energy facts at you. So just sit tight. I have this slide and one more slide, and then you don't have to listen to me talk about energy anymore. So to understand more about the affordability of energy and cooling, let's talk about how electricity is billed. Normally, there's a mix in any bill of a flat fee and a unit per price of energy. Now, that unit is a kilowatt hour. So what the hell is a kilowatt hour? A kilowatt hour is how much energy is required to run a 1,000 watt appliance for 1 hour, right? What I could find on the internet was that a 1,000 watt appliance is a coffee maker. So I thought that it was a toaster, which is why there's a toaster on this slide. But when I checked my notes, it's a coffee maker. So if you think about how long or how much power it would take you to run a coffee hour for 1 hour, that is a kilowatt hour. And the energy company charges a fee, like a price per kilowatt hour on top of this flat fee. So recap, flat fee, price per unit of electricity used. Recently, SoCal Edison, which is the electric provider for the majority of San Gabriel Valley, they actually dropped their price per unit, but they raised their flat fee and they raised it. It is now one of the most expensive flat fees in the entire country. The way that they've highlighted this, of course, isn't like, hey guys, we raised this to be one of the most expensive flat fees in the country. What they've said is like, oh, it's cheaper energy now, guys. Like this should make, if you use a lot of electricity already, your bill's probably going to go down. But of course, for people living in smaller apartments or people who are very attentive about the energy use, this is likely increasing their bills. SoCal Edison does offer some discounts to qualifying customers. And a great place to find a summary of these is the LIHEAP website, which Sarah's going to drop in the chat. This isn't just for SoCal Edison, though. This is for literally any utility provider in the United States. This website should have the discount programs that are available and the criteria in order to qualify for those. So you'll notice that on the slide, I have this hilarious pun. Does
I'm
anyone
sorry.
care if I have a fear of dying from complications I incurred during a heat emergency? And that is because CARE and FIRA are the two discount programs that SoCal Edison offers. These are applicable for households that are bringing in less than 60% of the state median income, which of course changes depending on how many people live in your household. Both of them reduce bills around 20%. And for both programs, you get kicked out every 2 years and you have to re-enroll. So you will be jumping through hoops for them every 2 years. Wanted to also mention that there's a medical baseline allowance. So that's if you have certain medical conditions or if you use like a medical device, should check and see if your utility provider will pitch in for any of that. SoCal Edison, they just discount their unit price again. So it still is like, seemed pretty toothless to me, but good to know. And then there's also an energy assistant fund, and that's a one-time assistance for customers, which is actually a nonprofit. Excuse me. It's actually a nonprofit, and anyone here can donate to it because it's tough out there for, a investor-owned utility with a captive market. And so, anyone can donate to help them help their customers if you
Help
feel
SoCal
called.
Edison, guys.
Yeah. But just a local business. So, okay. And then our last term of this page is, these are like the boringest sounding series of words you've ever heard in your life. Community choice aggregation. So, technically speaking, the role of a utility is generation. That's when you cook up the energy, and then delivery. And that's when they run it through transmission lines, into distribution lines, and then drop it into a service into your house. And so a community choice aggregation is all about generation. It's all about that first part. And community choice aggregations give the consumers a say in how their energy is generated. So this usually means that they're able to prefer green energy. And the rest of the energy service is taken care of by that like original utility provider, but at least, you could have a say in that you don't want fossil fuel burned for your energy. So a local example of a CCA is Clean Power Alliance. They actually do serve a couple cities in the San Gabriel Valley. They're a nonprofit, so that's cool that investors aren't profiting off of a resource needed for modern life. They have a specific capacity, so they're not able to accommodate everyone. They can only generate so much electricity, and they are growing. So once they have more capacity, they'll be able to serve more cities. But there is it's a whole thing to get involved. It's a 3-year waiting list, and I think they said it was like a 1 to 2 year process also to get incorporated. But still a neat thing that is in existence and hopefully expanding. Next slide, please. Okay, so green energy, everybody loves green energy, aka renewables. That's solar, wind, geothermal, hydro. About 40% of California's energy comes from renewables. Awesome. Their goals are to be up to 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2045, which is a lot. Um, there is so much money that needs to be invested into green energy. Like insane amounts of money need to be invested. Sarah and I actually went to this I don't know how Sarah signed up for like literally every newsletter in like the country. And so these venture capitalists like invited us to watch their webinar about venture capitalism in green energy and like investment in green energy. And it was super depressing because they were like,
We don't
well,
recommend it.
yeah, we needed a pep talk afterwards. But basically, they said that how like normally with energy, like the government will come in and invest first, and then they need private capital to come in order to like scale that investment. And green energy is not sexy enough to the venture capitalists. But maybe people will like grow a conscience soon. Okay, the next term is eco-NIMBYism. If anyone doesn't know what a NIMBY is, NIMBY is a acronym for not in my backyard. And I'm going to tell a
Tell a
story
tale.
to illustrate eco-NIMBYism. So, California started this year offering this new grant. And the grant is specifically for reducing the impact of extreme heat on a local level. And so SGV Casita had all these meetings with different cities and nonprofits. And we were talking about like, hey, what do you have? Like, what do you have in mind? Are you going to apply for this? And like, what were you thinking? And so we'd always be like trying to like butt it and be like, did you guys want to like include air conditioning in that? Like, wouldn't that be cute if you guys just like took like a senior housing building and gave everybody like AC units? That'd be so fun. And people did not want to touch AC with a 10-foot pole. They were completely uninterested. And they were like, we were thinking a tree planting campaign, which is great. I'm not mad about a tree, but like a tree will keep you cool in 30 years. Like, how long does a tree have to mature in order for it to like offer any cooling elements? And it just was really frustrating to me that like these campaigns are specifically they were meant to like help disadvantaged communities, and people were like, no, they don't need AC. They can have some trees though. And it just also like makes me wonder how many of them are like, yeah, sure, you can have like you can plug in your Tesla. Feel welcome to like add like an e-bike to the grid. Um, but as far as AC goes, like that's just where we draw the line. I see Tracy. Raise your
Tracy.
hand. Please take the floor.
That would be cute to have air conditioning. I mean, I don't know, but
Right? Wouldn't that
what
be a good
it would
look?
be
You
so
could be like, hey
amazing.
guys.
Wow. But
Yeah.
that makes me think because guys know I'm always stuck in my cab listening to KNX 1070. And a few months back, because I know they're trying to put stuff on the ballot to make air conditioning required in rental units. And
Mhm.
so, of course, they asked the white people, like, what do you think about air conditioning in the units? And I can always tell when it's white people who have air conditioning, or they may own like they might own rental units or something, and they're like, well, I don't understand why the landlords should be responsible for air conditioning. And I'm yelling at the radio like because okay, I'm not going to cuss because I'm not going to say what I say when I'm yelling at the radio, but and people know there's usually an MF and an F bomb and what have you. But it's like because these people are paying rent, and housing is a human right, and it should be safe, affordable, and comfortable. You should not roast in your apartment just because you have an apartment. I grew up in, when you said something about what is it, you said 2040 something, whatever the date was, I will be 79 years old on that that year. So I no one should have to wait to get air conditioning. It's just I live in the valley. I've lived in the valley now for 32 years, and my first apartment out here had one air conditioning unit for a townhouse. The second apartment I lived in, we had one unit for a two-bedroom apartment. So my son put one in his room, and at the time, and we put one in my bedroom, and it was comfortable. Plus the way, and now I live in a three-bedroom house with central air. The first summer, that was the first time I've ever lived somewhere with central air. In the first summer that we lived here, and I turned on the air conditioner, I'm like, oh. So I understand what people are going through, and I just think it's ridiculous that it's not required for landlords to have air conditioning, and especially in the valley, San Fernando, where I live, in San Gabriel, where y'all live.
Yeah,
Yeah, completely.
thank you
Well,
for
and what's
sharing. Go ahead,
yeah,
Amanda. You
thank
take.
you so much for sharing. And what's strange is that like rules like that exist other places that maybe they have like a greater history of being like as warm as it is now, but like in Phoenix, there like you have to provide there is a maximum temperature requirement. So really it just seems like a matter of time, and it's absurd and like out of touch that people think that it's this like luxury that they're providing when it's actually just ultimately survival. Um, Thank you so much again, Tracy, for sharing. Uh, this last term is energy democracy, which kind of like I have a hard time touching on it because like I feel like we could do an entire presentation on that alone. Energy democracy exists as like a concept, but also as a real thing. This is decentralizing energy decisions and ownership. If you've ever heard about like microgrids, that kind of has to do with energy democracy. This is if you think about who's in charge of energy and it being like this company. Imagine if you know it was in a co-op with your neighbors that like people would have direct representation and say on their energy decisions. And what's interesting is that this doesn't only exist as an idea. There are rural co-ops all over the country. When I worked with utilities in Arizona and in Indiana, like both of those states have multiple co-ops. So a cool thing, and hopefully something that will continue to kind of like um, you know, be conceptualized more. Next slide. All right, Godfrey, will you fire that last bucket of polls?
Okay, this is the last one. There's 7 questions. I appreciate all of you.
All right, about halfway done. Thanks everybody again. We'll go another minute or so. Still working. Okay, very good. Okay, let's do 10 more seconds. All right. End the poll. I'm sharing the results in case those are interesting.
Yeah. I see AC as a main method, and then fans.
Gotta love fans.
Yeah. one of our biggest like takeaways when as we've been doing a lot of research is like there comes a certain point when the body like can't cool itself down and you need external help. And we don't know how else to do it other than AC.
Okay. Speaking of AC, I'm going to start my cooling slide. All right, so we have 4 topics to talk about here. I'm going to get through those as efficiently as I can. Okay, so this beautiful picture of me looking very pleased with myself. That's from one of our library hours meetings. And we'd been hearing a lot about heat pumps, air conditioning, heat pumps. A lot of people talk about how efficient heat pumps are. And so I wanted to understand what's the difference between AC and heat pumps and what are the mechanisms that make a heat pump so much more efficient. And so I watched a bunch of YouTube videos on how air conditionings function and how heat pumps function. And let me tell you that they are thermodynamic wonders. If anyone is like a physics 101 level of like interested about air conditioning, like watch a YouTube video on how air conditioners work. They're incredible. Refrigerant is an insane invention. I won't force anyone through like my error-filled thermodynamic explanation, but I will say that a heat pump and an air conditioner function exactly the same. They use the same amount of energy. What makes a heat pump so much better than an air conditioning is that a heat pump works both seasons. So a heat pump keeps you cool in the summertime and it keeps you warm in the wintertime. Whereas an AC will only keep you cool in the summertime, and then you'll need a furnace which burns fossil fuels to keep you warm in the winter. So because the heat pump does the job of two and it doesn't require burning any fossil fuels, that is why a heat pump is the better option and like a better choice if you are ever interested in upgrading to a heat pump. Also wanted to mention about air conditioning that a lack of air conditioning is an important predictor of illness and death from heat, and it shouldn't surprise us that in most cities, the whiter and richer you are, the more likely you are to have air conditioning. The next topic is active and passive cooling. This is a lot of conversations about cooling talk about active versus passive. Active is air conditioning and ceiling fans, whereas passive cooling is airflow that comes from an open window or awnings to create shade. So passive is normally part of like the built environment, whereas active cooling usually requires energy. Cooling centers. So cooling centers are a huge part of local government's response to extreme heat. It's a low cost intervention. Has everyone heard of a cooling center? Does anybody? Well, I guess I'll explain it if you don't know, but I just am curious. If you don't know what a cooling center is, cool off. If you don't know what a cooling center is, please sound off in the comments just so that I can know. Because I'm curious. I don't know if people know about that or not, because I'm not sure if I did or not when we started this investigation. Anyways, these are buildings that the government provides that have air conditioning. They've done some studies on them, and although they're like very effective in providing cooling for people, they're not very used, like 3 to 5% capacity for a lot of cooling centers. And we read some studies that are like asking why. Do people know where they are? Do people know they exist? Can people bring their pets? That can be an issue. What would it take you to visit your local cooling center? That would be something I would be interested in knowing. Sarah's going to drop in the chat a link. This is an LA County link, and it will tell you where to find your nearest cooling center.
I can tell you that my city does not have a cooling center. I mean, we have a library, but it's not like an official cooling center. Yeah, they're just it's wild stuff.
Yeah, I looked up mine, and mine allows pets, which is very exciting. Okay, and then last topic, chief heat officers. So as heat becomes something that people finally begin to reckon with and respond to. An early question is, who handles this? Is it the public health? Is it sustainability department? With cooling centers, is that Parks and Rec? And so a new role and department is emerging, and that is the chief heat officer. And sometimes even a department to support them, which is awesome. So they handle policy development, safety protocols, community engagement, gathering data, and they can coordinate with other agencies. So this is a specific measure that many in the heat equity space are calling for. And this is also like in heavy contrast to say, like when everyone just decided to get diversity and inclusion officers and we're like, everything's fixed. Now we solved racism. These people are in roles that they're not expected to immediately solve everything. So they should, they're being elected or appointed to spearhead this like new movement in government. LA City has a chief heat officer. Her name is Marta Segura. That's neat. And no city in the SGV has appointed a chief heat officer. So extreme heat preparation, response, and mitigation is either addressed by the sustainability officers or possibly not at all. Okay, you guys survived my slides. Congratulations. Throwing it to you, Sarah.
You did it. Congrats to everybody for surviving all of our slides so far. We know this is dense. But we're almost there. This is our last meaty slide. Okay. We've almost done it. Okay. So here's the last sort of confusing thing to sort of grapple with. There's lots of efforts out there right now working on long-term solutions to change heat and reduce climate change, like decarbonization efforts. Then there are efforts out there working on short-term solutions that are not necessarily about reducing climate change, but are helping people survive the heat, like air conditioning. Then there are some strategies that, depending on how you look at it, could be both, like heat resistant crops, and we sort of consider air conditioning to be that too. So the literature disagrees, like the academic stuff, you don't like, that's a different conversation. But if this were a classroom, we would be having a different conversation about these two terms. Sometimes it calls the long-term strategies adaptation. Sometimes it calls the long-term strategies resilience. The subject is so new, it's natural. There's some disagreement, and also it's natural that language changes. I think today, for example, we have a different understanding of just the word resilience in the wake of the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements. Resilient also gets used a lot when referring to disasters and a community's ability to minimize damage in the face of disaster. So we at SGV Casita, at least, we've been using resilience to mean the long-term systemic stuff and adaptation to mean the short-term things that can offer immediate relief to people. But really, the most important thing that we want for you to take away, like you don't have to memorize the difference between the two. We just want you to know that heat solutions sometimes have different goals and are trying to address different things. And when you hear about a solution, we just want you to be able to think, what is the goal? What is the goal here? So yeah, that is it. We have some references after this. Allison, if you could just click through so people can sort of see if you're interested. I know it feels like we gave you half of these tonight. You can just keep going. You can keep going. We can give you all of this later. Allison will be sending out an email to all the registrants who missed it, the recording, and then some of the addendums and stuff. So you'll get this if you want later. But yeah, now we're ready for your questions if you have any. I know it never ends. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm so okay.
You're good, Sarah. No, I just want to say, first of all, like, thanks for the presentation. You gave us a lot to think about. Eager to hear the questions, thoughts, and reactions from our audience. Thank you, Amanda and Sarah.
Mhm.
Well, it's not so much a question. I thought about what you were saying about the whiter you are and the richer you are. That's, so since I can't turn white, Michael Jackson white, I married a white woman so I could have air conditioning.
We will take that to the county listening session. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you.
I betrayed my race
Oh,
for air conditioning. I'm just kidding, y'all. But am I?
thanks, Tracy. Does anyone? Oh, Godfrey, I see a hand.
Hey, I do have a question. Thank you for, first of all, I was texting with Allison during this. It was just like, they know so much. And I can't believe there's like this is the dialed down version
Sorry.
of what you all know. So thank you for getting us started with this. I guess from an organizing standpoint, some things to know are like, as you know, at LA Forward, we've been doing a lot of work around housing in particular, but we are restarting our climate group. And so at some point are looking for opportunities to organize around issues possibly related to this or different from this, but I guess I'd love to get your sense based on your research and you're taking a look at the landscape across LA County, where you see like the lowest hanging fruit
Mm.
being in terms of like, here are things that like people are generally talking about at any sort of level of government or agency. And like you think with just a little bit of a nudge or something, like there could be wins for some level of people. And so I'm curious, yours again, I know like you all are expert enough, but maybe continue to be imposter syndrome type of people. But what's your best assessment
What?
of
No.
of yeah
Uh,
of low hanging fruit?
I would say the first low hanging fruit is this maximum indoor temperature. Um, the landlord groups are organized as all heck, as we know, and they were the ones giving the most robust public comment when city council was trying to pass the motion to pass a motion, right? So there's lots of city council meetings, or sorry, county meetings. And for anyone interested on the call, Hilda and Solis are the ones who are sort of championing the maximum indoor temperature initiative. So that's districts 1 and 5. But we think that's going to be a little bit of a road. They have a consultant now. They're going to be doing the listening sessions. We do not know exactly how they're handling this, and we've been bothering them a lot. And what we know so far is that they don't even know how they're handling this. So they had to get a consultant to organize the listening sessions. Once we get in there and sort of get a grasp of how really right now it's the consultants that are driving, right? So once we get a feel for them, we're going to find out what are the opportunities for public comment, for other engagement. But we know for sure that the landlords are there at those tables having those conversations, and the tenants are not represented. So to someone's point earlier in the chat, like, are these maximum indoor temperatures going to be considering tenant health? We sure as hell hope so. We'll be there to raise that point, but I don't know what they're thinking about right now. So that would be the lowest hanging fruit. And that's sort of like impending within the next couple weeks. Like the listening session's on the 25th, which is 2 weeks. So we should hopefully have some more information for you, Godfrey, about organizing around that. Second lowest hanging fruit after that, I would say, is the chief heat officer. So as Amanda was mentioning on that slide earlier, that is one strategy of many to get infrastructure in place to deal with this. What we noticed, so we've been working with some cities. It's been going, and they are just not organized. When we talk to them about dealing with extreme heat, it's always a conversation of like, we don't have the time, we're understaffed, right? Cities are understaffed. Who's responsible for this hot potato? And so we do not want chief heat officers to be responsible for hot potatoes the way that like DEI officers got tasked with hot potatoes after the George Floyd riots, and then were set up for failure because a corporate company decided to hire one person to solve a systemic racial issue and then set them up for failure and then fired them and said, oh, sorry, we can't solve DEI anymore. But we want like really deep infrastructure. We want a department that's going to be able to access other departments in cities. And so that's a much longer, and that I say that's the next lowest hanging fruit because I think that's achievable on a local level. So Marta is the chief heat officer in LA City, but there is no other city in LA County that has a chief heat officer. So I think that's something to consider on a local level. But the maximum indoor temperature, I think, is the very first front and center thing. Amanda, would you add anything? I guess energy wise or what have you?
Uh, like just I'd add that the city of LA has also been like flirting with the idea of maximum indoor temperature. They haven't been like we haven't been able to like see the thread moving through as clearly as it's moved through LA County. Um, yeah, I think that's all I would add.
Oh yeah, Marta's office was getting defunded. There's a huge slew of climate um, defunding that happened in the state of California. So that's going to trickle down, which is, I know exactly what you wanted to hear. But I guess another low hanging fruit, would, which is sort of a sideways fruit, um, would be getting people enrolled in the assistance funds. No one's using them. No
Oh,
one's.
yeah. And that's another thing that we had talked about when we were trying to like when we were going around with the ICARB grant and talking to cities and nonprofits, one of the things that we wanted to know is like if they could pair installing those ACs with like education and asking people if they were enrolled in those programs. Because again, if you look at that LIHEAP website, it has every single utility and it should have every single discount program. And there should be like a pretty vast swath of LA County that is eligible for those and might not be using it. Yeah, Tracy, go ahead.
I know through DWP, one of those things that nobody knows about. Depend if you like, because like I get the low income discount because I have a disability, but they will pay for air wall units or window units if you apply for the program. And a lot of people don't know about that. So that's something I don't know. I think a lot of it is about education. I'm one of those people that as soon as I find out about stuff like this, I let people know. Like I let them know about the level pay plan. So for your gas and electricity, I mean, this is DWP stuff, but I don't know what other utilities have it. Because I have friends that live in other states and they don't have these things. But you know, so if you don't get these huge bills in the summer for your air conditioning and huge bills in the winter for your heating, so it kind of levels out. So those are things, and low income discounts as well.
Yeah, there's a bunch out there. Well, I wouldn't say a bunch, but there's a handful, and even those handful are really underutilized because red tape. They're not in Spanish. They're only in English. That kind of it's just a mess. But yeah, that's something we're wanting to compile. We've got a really long wish list of things that we want to do. One of which is organize a database, and I'm using that term loosely, of sort of compiling like a headquarters of where to go to get information about all this that's really simple based on where you live. That's a ways away, but yeah, it's a mess out there.
Sarah and Amanda, just being cognizant of the time.
Hmm.
Um, First of all, thank you for a great presentation and too many facts to fight away in one session. But also to everyone who attended, and just like in this last like discussion, a takeaway for me is there's a myth that we know it's a myth in our culture that there are a lot of like people who sap or tax these relief programs. And what you've shared with us tonight is we have a pretty important program that can help people with cooling costs that's underutilized. And I think that's among the many narrative changes that we're trying to do in the housing movement. I think that's really important to note that a life-saving service, right? Cooling costs right now is being underutilized, in addition to sharing it out with folks.
Mm-hmm. That's a
But
really good.
yeah, was there anything you wanted to like share with us as we wrap up before we go? I've got a very shameless plug for LA Forward future events, which is my next slide. So you just let me know when you're good to wrap up, because this has been amazing, Amanda and Sarah. And I know for myself, I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to your next session in the next few months.
Yeah, we have well, if you are all ready for it and you're okay, we're gonna go to just the last slide, which is like how to get in contact with us. So these are our emails. We sort of operate as a unit. So whoever you feel more comfortable reaching out to, we always loop each other in eventually. So they all roads lead to Narnia in this case. We don't check our Instagram super often, but our emails, we're email people. So I would say go there, please. And some things you can ask us for if you are interested. We love a good meeting. We are happy to send you any resources.
Love a meeting.
We love a good meeting. And if you want us to send you a heat equity one pager about your city, Amanda, if you can go ahead and drop that in the chat if you have it, the Baldwin Park one. We do these one pagers, or we have these one pagers for cities if you want to email blast your representatives about like why they should care about extreme heat. It's just a very basic 101. But if you want one for your city, just email us and tell us what city you're in. If you want to consult with us, if you want to invite us to speak at your mutual aid organization or tenant union, all of those things are things you can ask us for. We will have the 102. We don't have a date yet. We'll get that figured out. And yeah, that's it. We have, if you're not tired of filling things out for us, which you very well might be, I'm going to drop actually two things in the chat. One is the slides from tonight. You don't have to wait. They're available immediately because we are those kinds of people. And there you go. The second thing I'm going to drop in the chat is a survey. We love a good survey. This survey actually is for us. It is for like what resource would you find useful that we can provide you? That's what that survey is. And that is all of it. Amanda, would you want to add anything?
Nope, I don't think so.
Alrighty. Thank you all for staying with us. Take care of yourselves, stay hydrated. Allison, take it away with your shameless plug. Do it. Go ahead.
Will do. And I hope I don't like mess up the slide. So, which it looks like I'm going to. Yes. So, LA Forward, first of all, thank you, Amanda and Sarah. It's so exciting that this project came out of a convening and opportunity that LA Forward brought to y'all. So that's just very exciting. So we're excited to bring you other events. Later this week, we've got a social housing 101, again online, 6:30. We're partnering with Housing Now, ACT LA, San Gabriel Valley Tenants Alliance, Healing and Justice Center, and San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust to talk about the basics of social housing. Next week, Godfrey and I are working on a teach-in for the big major changes proposed for LA County. This is the expansion of the Board of Supervisors. This is a huge deal. If you're curious, interested, or otherwise moved, please join us on Monday, July 15th at 6 p.m. And I've got the RSVPs below these events, but I'll also send this out in an email so you can RSVP from the links. Next Wednesday, David Levitas, the executive director of LA Forward, is doing, I would call an exciting history lesson, the housing justice movement in LA City. So very exciting. That's Wednesday, July 17th, 7 to 8 p.m. And then we do have an in-person mixer Tuesday, July 30th, 6 to 8 p.m. in the San Fernando Valley. You can see the RSVP there, which will provide location information. But these are some ways for you all to plug in or share with your friends to plug in with LA Forward in the next few weeks. And with that, we'll see if I can again move this thing forward. A big thank you to everyone for sharing their evening with us here.
Thank you all.
Yes,
Thank
you
you
so much.
all. Class dismissed.
That's right, everyone.
Good night, all.
Thanks again. Have a great evening.
You can stop recording, right? Stop recording before we say anything.
Let me just
Oh, it is
hold on,
recording
hold on.
still.